Bryan, why don't we begin by your telling us a bit about your professional background?
Sure thing, Doug. I began my professional career as an English teacher in the early 90s over in Newtown High School here in Connecticut. After a few years doing that work, I became very interested in technology and education and had an opportunity to move into a position as the manager of technology operations for both the district and the town. So I gave that a shot for about a year and a half or so, learned quite a bit. Back then we were developing wide area networks using cable modems and things like that people couldn't imagine doing these days. But then I realized also that I felt a little too far from the classroom. So I took a position as the Dean of Students up in Litchfield, Connecticut, which was a 7 through 12 building. After doing that for a little while, had an opportunity to become an assistant principal at a middle school, working with 7th and 8th grade. Then in that same district, I moved up to the high school as assistant principal, then became principal of Brookfield High School. So all in all, I was in that district for 9 years in Brookfield in various administrative positions. And I thought that was the job I'd have for the rest of my life. Very much enjoyed it, working with the students. It was a school of about 1,200 students. Then I had the opportunity to become principal of New Canaan High School. And I moved down to southern Fairfield County in doing that and became the principal here for 3 years. Again, thought I'd be doing that job for a very long time, but then had a chance to try my hand in the superintendency when the superintendent who was here retired, stepped into the role, and now I'm in my 5th year here as the superintendent, learning and enjoying it every day. Educationally, I have my undergraduate from Clemson University, a master's degree from Western Connecticut State, another from Sacred Heart University, and I have my doctorate degree from Teachers College, Columbia University. And one of the ways I've always worked to stay connected to the classroom is working at the college level, teaching through UConn and Central Connecticut State in their educational leadership programs, and I've had some wonderful opportunities through that.
Well, you're one busy fellow then. You're actively teaching still, as well as being chief executive superintendent of New Canaan Schools.
When I stepped into the superintendency, I slowed my teaching, my college teaching down a little bit, but over at UConn, I've had some opportunities to do some amazing things, including some trips over to the Middle East to teach in Jordan, practicing principles and others to teach about school climate, assessment, some other things. And I've spent a couple of weeks out there in the Middle East thanks to UConn and grants that were underwritten by others. And so yeah, I've had some wonderful opportunities to really learn and grow and to share some of what I know with some folks, around the world. Now in my 5th year as a superintendent here, I was just recently named the president of the Southern Fairfield County Superintendents Association, which is a group of 18 superintendents representing districts throughout Southern Fairfield County, both small and large, urban and suburban, everything from 2,000 students up to about 23,000 students over in Bridgeport. So it's a diverse group working with a variety of different contexts and populations, but we come together about once a month as superintendents to talk together and spend some time. So this is my 1st year as the president of that group as well.
Well, thanks, Bryan. Now, our subject today is an October 26th work session that you and your Southern Fairfield County colleagues held. I think you called it a high-impact governing work session. What's the backstory on that? What led to the decision to hold it?
Sure. Well, I mentioned the Southern Fairfield County group, and that's who was involved. And that group traditionally meets once a month. We meet at a restaurant, we get together, have some lunch, share some reporting out to each other, and then really talk together about our experiences. We have a roundtable that's really the bulk of that meeting each month, where we share what's happening in our districts, we ask questions of each other, we process. It's great time, and it's collegial, but sometimes it feels like a therapy session, as we're sitting there and just sharing with each other our experiences a bit. So each year, and again, this is my 5th year here as superintendent, each year in the spring we'd start talking about a retreat and trying to get together and what used to happen in the past, but it hasn't materialized. So, you know, when I became the president of the group, I really wanted to transform the group a bit into a learning community of practitioners so that we can truly sort of grow as superintendents throughout the region. You know, we often in the press and other ways are compared against each other and our student performance sort of things. But, you know, it's just that old cliche of a rising tide lifting all boats. You know, if we can develop ourselves as superintendents together throughout the region, I think it will help everyone to be more successful. And years ago, I heard a story from a superintendent who was part of a panel, and she was talking about her experiences. And she was a second-year superintendent, and she said, you know, when she first got into the superintendency, she was so frustrated because all she wanted to do was get into the classrooms and work with the teachers and be in the schools and start doing, you know, keep doing that good work that she'd been doing and what she was so successful at. And she felt like every meeting she had just pulled her away from that work. And she was so frustrated every day because she couldn't do that work. And then she said as the year ended, she started to reflect and realized that those other obligations weren't pulling her away from the work. Those other obligations were the work. And that resonated for me, and it just stuck with me that, you know, here was somebody, she left the superintendency in her second year because she just didn't like doing the work. And so, you know, that stuck with me as I became superintendent and you know, the work and the expectations that we have. And then I was fortunate to be a member of the AASA National Certification Program that we met over the course of a couple of years and built another community of practice of my colleagues nationally. And in that program, we had opportunities to hear from excellent speakers and to do great work. And at the last session, I heard a speaker share with us a new and really, for me, unfamiliar perspective on the superintendent's work that really confirmed what that superintendent said those years ago as a member of that panel and made me really want to learn more. And as I started thinking about that more, I thought, this topic, this sort of frame for the superintendency could be a great subject for a professional learning opportunity across the entire southern Fairfield County. And so in August, I reached out to the speaker to see if he'd be interested, and 3 months later, we pulled it off.
Great. Now, what did you do to make sure this day-long session, I guess, right? It was a full day.
Well, it was.
To make sure it would be successful. What sort of preparation steps did you go through?
Sure. We knew that it was so very important to spend a significant amount of time up front preparing for the session. So after I connected with the speaker, and he agreed to be able to schedule time and to come and to facilitate this group for us, you know, we quickly designed a collaborative and inclusive process to plan and implement the workshop. So what we did specifically was we created a steering committee with 4 superintendents, myself included, to consider and discuss and debate and decide upon topics and formats and other suggestions for the day. You know, we really knew that it's a significant request to ask superintendents to spend an entire day out of their district. And so we wanted to make sure the time was as valuable as possible. And as a steering committee, we use that as kind of our guiding principle. We wanted to make sure that every minute of the day was as valuable as possible for the people who were involved. So we got together, we talked those pieces through. We had an initial phone conference with the speaker to talk about the overall objectives and outcomes for the day. With that always as our guide, let's make this as valuable as possible. Of course, we weren't there to try to burn people out. We wanted it to be a professional experience for all of our superintendents because, you know, that's the work that we do. So we wanted to balance. We wanted to make sure their voices were a part of what we did. So we talked together, had our phone conference with the speaker for those overall outcomes, and then the facilitator worked up an initial agenda. And then we had a second conference to hammer out the details and really work our way through that agenda. Once we had it ready, a big part of it was breakout groups, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But one of the things we did was really spend time training our group leaders as well, so that even though they were only going to break out for, say, 45 minutes throughout the entire day, we wanted to be sure they were equipped to do that successfully. And then on the day itself, we had great attendance participation, and it went very, very well. But it really was the pre-work that we put into it by forming the steering committee, opening up that communication with the facilitator. And then we even thought about little details. Like as a group, we said, hey, since we're asking superintendents to come out of the district for an entire day, let's see if we can do it on a Friday. And this way, they can be out of the district on this Friday, and then they can go into the weekend and really have some time to process and reflect and think about the work we did, instead of having it, say, on a Wednesday where they might have a board meeting that night, or they might have, then everything that Thursday brings, as we know. So we really tried to get to the fine level of details to structure it to be as successful as possible.
Well, now, tell us a bit more about the design itself. What objectives did you set specifically, and how did you structure the day? So get into the nuts and bolts of the design.
Sure. As I mentioned before, and I think it's just so important as a guiding principle to designing the work, the core of the day was the understanding that superintendents are high-level executives. They're experts in their fields and in their districts, and that we wanted to maximize this day as an opportunity to hear their voices throughout the day. So it was not a just sit and get kind of day. It was, the day was structured with an understanding that people bring so much expertise. The best way to help everyone in the room is to tap into that as much as possible. So what we did, we started the day with a couple of some conversation and then some warm-up questions that were reflective in nature, where we asked the superintendents to think about their current boards, think about what's working, what's not. There was a question around a governance success that their board has had in the past year, and then we shared that out as a whole group. And that was a great warm-up activity because it was reflective in nature and it got everybody comfortable, because one of the objectives of the day was also that here's a group of superintendents who are highly skilled and very successful. Let's build the collegiality between us. We get together and we talk about work, we talk about that, but let's share some of our own experiences to get to know each other on a deeper level so that we are more comfortable learning together, growing together, talking together in the future. So the warm-up questions worked very well. It was very successful. As a matter of fact, there were some people saying they could do that all morning, right? But we had to stop that after a little while. Then there was some content delivery, which was very important, because it's going back to even my experience in Nashville, understanding the relationship of the superintendent to the board chair, understanding how the structure of a board can have a direct impact on the successful outcomes for that board, purposefully thinking through the board's role. And a couple of pieces that came out even in that morning that I'm still reflecting on is this concept of thinking about the board as its own unit within a district. And so how do you continue to develop and work with that unit as superintendent? How do you continue to build and strengthen the relationship and the partnership between the board and super? So the more we spent some time laying that type of groundwork, but then we moved into really the bulk of the work. And
now,
I think
can I interrupt just
of course.
quickly, Bryan, and I want to make sure everyone listening knows what you were hoping to achieve. What were the specific objectives you and your colleagues on the steering committee set for this day? The general topic, of course, was the board-superintendent relationship and how to develop the board. But what were your specific objectives?
Sure. Specific objectives were, one, for our superintendents to come together, to learn, to grow, to build the collegiality across the region. That was one of our overarching thoughts.
Okay.
Another was to work because I do believe this governance work is so important and so new for so many of us, it's a bit of a reframing of that, or expansion of the understanding. One of the superintendents at the end even said that the day was paradigm shifting for him. It's a bigger understanding of that the role of the superintendent as CEO of a district to working with the board. There's, to me, I'm always thinking about our roles as superintendents and the professionalism of our role. I think that there are always sort of external forces at work trying to deprofessionalize what we do and perhaps discredit our work, our experience, and other things. To me, the work we do as educators in general is the most important work on the planet. And to really focus on the superintendency as its own sort of function and role in and of itself. As I said to the group early, as we just welcomed them in the morning, being a principal, being an assistant superintendent, having those other roles is all great, but really there's not much that truly prepares you to be a superintendent. It's a very different function and role. And as I've heard people say, your colleagues are no longer your principals or other administrators in your district. Your colleagues are other superintendents. And so to bring us together to build that collegiality, to help reframe the position, understanding of the position in that way, and in essence, sort of, it's the focus on the professionalism of the role and understand that the superintendency itself is its own job category. It's not just an elevated administrator. It's very different with different expectations. So
and
we talked about all that.
No one else in the district is accountable for developing the board's governing capacity or accountable for the relationship with the board. It all comes down to the superintendent, right?
Absolutely. And not only are they nobody else accountable, what I've seen in my experience is the tone that the superintendent sets with the board will create ripples across the district. So it's the relationship the superintendent and the board forge and have, and the strength of their relationship has a direct impact on the district itself and its ability to bring in new innovations, its ability to build the public's trust, its ability to gain the momentum that it needs, that relationship. And it all stems from the success of the superintendent building that relationship with the board. I do believe it significantly impacts everybody else in the district.
Thanks, Bryan. Now, I interrupted you. You were, I think, going to describe the breakout group process. Why don't you tell us how you structured that process, how many groups, what some of the specific topics were, and so on?
Sure. So knowing that one of our goals was for people to really get to know each other across the region, we purposely structured the breakout groups so that everybody would have an opportunity to work with everybody else, which was a little tricky, as you piece it all together and what have you, but it worked out, I think, pretty well. So we had 3 rounds of breakout groups and 3 groups in each round. So 9 opportunities for breakout groups across the day, and each person was in 3, so 1 in the first round, 1 in the second, 1 in the third. The breakout groups, the strength of them really goes back to capitalizing on the intellectual and experiential capacity that was in that room. I mean, the folks that were in the room are obviously they're CEOs of their districts, they're the superintendents of their districts, and so to really capitalize on their voices and allowing their expertise, knowledge, experience, passion to all come through. So the breakout groups themselves focused on questions and tasks that are directly related to boards and communities, board members, board structures, and any one of the tasks that we chose for the breakout groups is actually a really good task for a board and a superintendent to go through on a retreat. So it was where the morning was reflective, the afternoon was really generative, thinking about the future, thinking about what we could do with our boards to forge a relationship, to clarify our communications, to look at our structures. So together we did things like looking at one round breakout groups. One group was fashioning a vision statement for a board. Another was looking at a profile of desirable board member attributes and contributions or qualifications. Another one was talking about board member governing performance targets and standards. So they were literally thinking about that relationship with the board, and in essence, and taking responsibility for the development of their board, right? So as you think about these things as a superintendent with colleagues, you're really starting to think about your responsibility in helping the board to accomplish these things, to get to these places that you're articulating and talking about. The rounds themselves were it was about 45 minutes in the group, and then about 30 minutes to report out from the groups. And the reporting out actually was an area where there was some levity. You know, we were able to come, everybody in every group was expected to talk for the reporting out, which was a great part of the structure, so nobody could just sort of coast through, right? We want to hear all voices. And we had some fun with that. You know, as the superintendents were introducing each other and cheering for one another as far as the reporting out goes, it really created a very positive atmosphere.
Well, it sounds like it was a great day. What's your assessment? How did it go?
Well, the evidence on how well it went is that just about every superintendent stayed for the entire day.
How many were there, by the way, Brian? How many?
We had 21 in the room. We had 21 participants in the room. Yeah, it worked perfectly for our structure, you know, and there were a couple that were planning to come and who last minute had something come up in their district, which we know happens. But having gone to different trainings and workshops and opportunity seminars with my colleagues here, it's rare that we spend an entire day in one place. And we know what the demands on superintendency is, what they are. So the fact that just about everyone was there, and the day went until 5:15 in the afternoon, which is really saying something since we hit the ground running at a little bit after 8 that morning. I think that in and of itself is evidence of the success. Of course, there's more. Since the day together, I've received emails from a number of people saying thank you not just for the content, but for just the opportunity to be with my colleagues. The superintendent I mentioned who said at the end that it was paradigm shifting for him has continued to contact me and talk about, what next steps and what can we do and how can we keep this alive for the group. Because for me in my role with the Southern Fairfield County group, that's one of my goals, to keep the learning, the conversations going for us, all of us, because I know we all have so much to learn from each other. So we have our first monthly lunch tomorrow, actually, so we'll be able to talk about it as a whole group. And I think as a group, they'll be interested in identifying some next steps and maybe even in the spring doing something off-site again. And I didn't mention that, but that was something else we did very purposely. We were very careful about picking the venue because we wanted to make sure that it was a place that the superintendents and everyone involved would be treated like the CEOs and people who they are. We didn't do it in a school. We didn't do it in a conference room somewhere. We found a venue that served breakfast and lunch, and that was really, and I met with them several times, and they had the equipment that we needed, the AV and all of that, and a big enough space so that when we were in there, we were treated like the professionals that you would want to be treated as superintendent. And that was an important piece. Again, I think the day itself went extremely well, and I very much look forward to following up with the folks and seeing what they have to say tomorrow.
Now, you mentioned maybe a follow-up session of some kind. Any other things come to mind that you might do? Or is that a premature question?
Well, we're, as I said, we're going to talk about it tomorrow a bit, but I do think that as a group, we will use our monthly meetings to talk a bit about some of the steps that we're taking to develop our board, our district, maybe to move towards the governance structure that we talked about that morning. I think that, a big outcome that I was hoping for that seems to have occurred was opening those lines of communications between us. I've gotten many more calls in the last couple of weeks from my colleagues just with questions or thoughts or what have you than I had in the past, and I think that goes across the board because having spent the day together, really it's important, I think, and both intellectually and emotionally, to spend the day with other people who are also doing the work that you're doing each day. because much like a principal, when I was principal at the high school, there's only one in a district if you're in a district with one high school. And so, you have a peer group of one in your district. And the same goes with you as a superintendent. So to spend the day with folks who can really empathize and talk, and it wasn't about solving each other's problems. It was really about learning together in order to build our understanding. That is an outcome that lasts. And I feel very good about it. We also had an intern there who is in a program working towards her superintendent certification, and she shared some feedback with me about how it really helps her to reshape her understanding of the role prior to entry, into the work. So I think that was another important part. Many people said throughout the day, the work we're doing isn't taught in grad school, and it's not. A lot of it's contextual. We get involved with a district, and it's always somewhere on its continuum of momentum and progress, and you have to work with that district in order to start moving it in whatever direction or accelerating the work it's already doing. So I could see it being hard maybe in a grad school, but the core work of governance, understanding the definition, understanding what it looks like when it's working well, is really important for people to know going into the role. I know my first couple of years I really struggled with how do you get anything done, and that's what governance is all about.
Well, Bryan, thank you so much. I know what kind of schedule you have, so I appreciate you taking the time to record this really fascinating podcast on what you and your colleagues in southern Fairfield County are doing on the governance front. I wish you well as you follow through on the process, and have a great weekend.